Chapter 1, Down the Rabbit Hole. Alice was getting so very bored sitting with her sister on the riverbank. She had nothing to do. She was just wondering if making a daisy chain was worth the trouble of getting up to pick the daisies when she saw a rabbit in a waistcoat. "Oh dear, I'll be late," cried the white rabbit. Alice didn't think it was strange that the rabbit was talking to himself, but she did find it odd when the rabbit took the watch out of his pocket. She had never seen a rabbit with a watch, much less a pocket to keep it in. Alice was burning with curiosity, but before her sister could stop her, she ran after the white rabbit. He hopped into a large rabbit hole, and she jumped in after him. And then she was falling, down, down, down. Would the fall never end? There was nothing to do, so Alice talked aloud to herself. "Dinah will miss me very much tonight," she said. Dinah was Alice's cat. "Dinah, my dear, I wish you were down here with me. There are no mice in the air, I'm afraid, but you might catch a bat, and a bat is like a mouse. But do cats eat bats, I wonder?" Alice was getting sleepy. The fall was just so very long. She mumbled, "Do cats eat bats? Do cats eat bats? And sometimes, do bats eat cats?" She couldn't answer either question, so it didn't really matter which she said. And then suddenly, thump, she landed on a pile of dry leaves and the fall was over. She wasn't hurt one bit. Up ahead, she saw the rabbit hurrying down a long hallway. She ran after him but lost him around a corner. There were doors all around her, but every single one was locked. Alice felt so very sad. She had come all this way and had lost the rabbit. But worse, she was stuck. Now she noticed a small glass table. On top was a tiny golden key. When she turned around, she saw a little door that hadn't been there before. It was about 15 inches high, and to her delight, the key opened it perfectly. The door opened into a passage about the size of a rat hole. Alice got to her knees to peek through. What she saw was the most lovely garden ever. She wanted to reach the colorful flowers, but even her head couldn't fit through the door. It was no use, so she went back to the little table and put the key down. Now there was a tiny bottle on the table. She was sure it hadn't been there before. On the bottle were the words, "Drink me." Alice was far too wise to drink a bottle that had just told her to. She knew she should see first if it was marked poison. The bottle was not marked poison, which meant she could drink it, and drink it she did. "What a curious feeling," she said, and curious indeed. She was shrinking. In the blink of an eye, she was only 10 inches high. Now she could go into the garden. But poor Alice, when she went to the tiny door, she found it locked again. And when she went to get the key, she discovered she was too small to reach the top of the table. So she sat down and cried. "It's no use crying," she scolded herself. She liked to pretend to be two people. But there's no use pretending to be two people now, she thought. There's hardly enough of me to make one whole person. Just then her eye fell on a little glass box under the table. It was a small cake. The words, "Eat me," were written on it in raisins. "Well, I'll eat it," said Alice. "If it makes me grow large, I can reach the key. If it makes me grow smaller, I can creep under the door. Either way, I'll get into the garden." Alice took the tiniest bite. "Which way?" she said to herself, and she was quite surprised to find she was still the same size. This is what usually happens when one eats cake, but Alice was now used to strange things happening. It seemed all for nothing to happen at all, so she took another bite, and soon she had eaten the entire cake. Curiouser and Curiouser, Chapter 2, The Pool of Tears. Curiouser and Curiouser, Alice said. She was now growing toward the ceiling. Goodbye, feet, she added. She could barely see them anymore. Oh, my poor little feet. I wonder who will put on your shoes and socks now. Alice kept growing. She wondered how she would get a new pair of shoes to her feet now that she could no longer reach them. They were so very far away that she decided she would have to mail them. At this thought, her head hit the ceiling. She was more than 9 feet tall. She quickly grabbed the golden key and hurried toward the garden door. Poor Alice. She was far too huge to fit through it now. All she could do is lie down and peek through the garden into the garden with one eye. Of course, she began to cry again. You should be ashamed, she scolded herself, a big girl like you crying this way. But it didn't help. She just kept crying, shedding gallons of tears, and soon there was a large pool on the floor. It was about 4 inches deep and reached halfway down the hall. Then she heard the footsteps. It was the White Rabbit. He was dressed up in a fancy suit and was carrying white gloves and a large fan. As he hurried along, he muttered, "Oh, the Duchess, she'll be awful if I keep her waiting." "If you please, sir," Alice called to him. The rabbit jumped at her voice. In fact, he was so startled he dropped his fan and gloves and then ran away, leaving them behind. Alice picked up the fan and the white gloves. The hallway felt so very hot, she started to fan her face, talking to herself as she did. How strange everything is today. I wonder if I was changed in the night. Let me think. Was I the same when I got up this morning? I think I remember feeling a little different. But if I'm not me, the next question is, who in the world am I? That's the puzzle. She thought about the other children she knew. She couldn't be Ada because Ada's hair was curly. She couldn't be Mabel because she knew lots of things and Mabel knew very little. Besides, Alice said, she's she and I'm I. Oh, how confusing. I should see if I know all the things I used to know. Let's see. 4 times 5 is 12. 4 times 6 is 13. 4 times 7 is, oh dear, I'll never get to 20 that way. Let's try geography. London is the capital of Paris, and Paris is the capital of Rome. No, that's wrong. I must be Mabel. Oops. She tried to recite a poem she knew, but her voice sounded rough and strange in her throat, and the words came out all wrong. Her eyes filled with tears again. If I'm Mabel, I'll stay down here forever. As she said this, she noticed she was wearing one of the rabbit's gloves. She must have put it on while she was talking. How did I do that? The glove had been far too small. Well, I must be shrinking again. Alice returned to the table. She guessed she was about 2 feet high and getting smaller. She realized it was the fan she was using to cool herself, so she dropped it in a flash. Alice was just in time to save herself from shrinking away to nothing. That's a narrow escape, she said, and she was quite relieved to see she was still there. She ran for the garden door, but it was still locked, and the golden key was back on the table. Things are worse than ever. Suddenly her foot slipped and there was a splash. She was up to her chin in the salt water. At first she had assumed she had fallen into the sea. Then she realized it was the pool of tears she had cried when she was 9 feet tall. She swam around, looking for a way out. I shall be punished for crying so much, and I'll be drowned in my own tears. Something splashed nearby. At first glance, she thought it was a walrus or a hippo. Then she realized it was only a mouse. Everything was so strange here. It shouldn't be strange at all if a mouse could talk. At first she said to it, "Oh, mouse," she called. She thought this must be the proper way to talk to a mouse. "Oh, mouse, do you know the way out?" The mouse met her eyes, but he did not reply. He must not understand English, Alice thought. He must be a French mouse. So she called, "Où est ma chat?" That was the first sentence in her French book. She forgot until she said it that the words meant, "Where is my cat?" The mouse leaped out of the water in fright. "I beg your pardon," Alice cried. "I forgot you don't like cats." "Not like cats?" the mouse said in a shrill voice. "Would you like cats if you were me?" "Maybe not," Alice said. "Please don't be angry. I wish I could show you my cat Dinah. I think you'd like cats if you saw her. She is such a sweet little thing." Alice kept talking as she swam. "She purrs, and she's so soft, and she's terrific at catching mice." "Oh, I'm sorry." The mouse looked especially offended. "We won't talk about Dinah if you'd rather not." "We indeed," the mouse cried. He was trembling. "As if I could talk about them. Cats, nasty things. Don't let me hear that word again." "I won't," Alice promised. She tried to think of something else to talk about. "Are you fond of dogs?" The mouse started to swim away. "Oh, I've offended him again," Alice said. She called after him, "Mouse, please come back. We won't talk about cats or dogs either." The mouse paddled back to her. His furry face had turned very pale. "Let's find the shore," he said to her, "and I'll tell you the story of why I hate cats and dogs." This seemed like a good idea to Alice. The pool had become very crowded with animals that had fallen in. She saw a dodo and a lory and many other creatures. Together, everyone swam to the shore. Chapter 3, A Caucus Race. The animals gathered on the bank of the pool of tears, but they were cranky, and they were soaking wet and very uncomfortable. They had a long talk about how to get dry. Alice found herself talking with them like she'd known them all her life, and it seemed quite natural. At last the mouse spoke up. "Sit down, all of you. Listen, I know how to make you dry." They sat in a circle with the mouse in the middle. "Are you ready?" he called. "This is the driest thing I know." And he began to talk about politics. He went on and on like he was reading aloud from the most boring book. "Ugh," said the lory with a shiver. The mouse talked on and on. It was quite awfully dull. After a while he paused. He turned to Alice. "How are you, my dear?" he asked. "As wet as ever," Alice said. She sighed. It doesn't seem to dry me at all." "In that case," the dodo spoke up, "the best thing we could to get us dry would be a caucus race." "What's a caucus race?" Alice asked. "The best way to explain it is to do it," the dodo said. The dodo marked off a race course. It was sort of a circle. He said the exact shape didn't matter. Then Alice and the animals were told to start running wherever they wanted on the circle. They could start whenever they wanted. They could also stop whenever they wanted. Because of this, it was hard to know when the race was over. After they had been running for a half hour or so, they were dry again, and the dodo called out, "The race is finished." The creatures crowded around. They were out of breath. "But who has won?" they asked. "Everybody has won," the dodo said after much thought, "and all must have prizes." "But who will give the prizes?" the creature asked. "She will, of course," said the dodo as if it were obvious, and he pointed at Alice. The animals ran to her. They jumped up and down. "Prizes, prizes," they yelled. Alice had no idea what to do. Finally, she pulled out a box of candies from her pocket. She was lucky the salt water hadn't ruined them. And she handed out the candies as prizes. There was exactly one piece for everyone, except for herself. "She must have a prize too," the mouse said. "Of course," replied the dodo. "What else do you have in your pocket?" he asked Alice. "Only a thimble," Alice said sadly. "Hand it over," said the dodo. Then they all crowded around her again. The dodo presented the thimble to Alice as her prize. He gave a short speech and everyone cheered. Alice thought the whole thing was absurd, but they looked so serious she didn't dare laugh. Finally, the animals sat in a circle again. "You promised to tell me your story," Alice reminded the mouse. She added in a whisper, "Why it is you hate C and D." "Mine is a long, sad tale," said the mouse. "It is a long tale," Alice said. She gazed in wonder at that mouse's tail. "Why do you call it sad?" she asked, puzzled. The mouse started his story, but Alice was still thinking about his tail. You're not paying attention, the mouse snapped. What are you thinking about? I beg your pardon, Alice said politely. You had reached the middle, I think. I have not, the mouse cried angrily. A knot? Alice said. She always wanted to make herself useful. Let me help you untie it. The mouse got up and walked away. You insult me by talking such nonsense, he sniffed. I didn't mean it, Alice pleaded. Please come back and finish your story. But the mouse hurried away. What a pity, said the Lory inside. I wish I had our Dinah here, Alice said. She'd soon fetch him back. And who is Dinah? Asked the Lory. Dinah's our cat, Alice said without thinking. She's so good at catching mice, and you should see her go after birds. She'll eat a bird as soon as look at it. This caused a lot of excitement among the creatures, and they ran off, each one in a different direction. Alice was soon all alone. I wish I hadn't mentioned Dinah, she said sadly. Nobody down here seems to like her. Alice began to cry again. She was feeling very sorry for herself. Then she heard footsteps in the distance. She looked up and she thought it might be the mouse, ready to forgive her and finish his story.